Welcome to episode 109 of Rubbish Talk with me, Alasdair.
Me, Henrik Webster, CEO of Aspect.
Welcome, Henrik. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about who you currently work for and a bit of the background, maybe a bit of background about yourself and your organisation, please.
Sure. I'm the CEO of Aspect Labs Ltd. We are an insurance MGA offering a property insurance to all sectors, but we do a lot in the waste and recycling sector. An MGA, for anybody who won't know,
That's
is
what I was just about to ask you, Henrik.
yeah,
We always have to explain acronyms.
yeah. Feel free to stop me at any point during the podcast, but I'll try to explain them. We have our own sort of language in insurance, as I'm sure you might do in the waste management sector as well.
Yep.
So an MGA stands for Managing General Agents. We work on behalf of insurance companies, almost like a consultant for them. So there might be something where they lack expertise, or perhaps something is too small for them to do, or they don't have the connections. So we go in there as a team and we say, we can underwrite this insurance on your behalf. We can deal with the brokers for you. We can help process the claims. And it helps insurers get into spaces that they might shy away from or just stay away from in general. So waste and recycling is one of those areas that tends to be dominated by MGAs at the moment. So a lot of the names that you see out there, they might not actually be insurance companies. They're just intermediaries working on behalf of insurers.
And how long has Aspect been going for? It's a fairly young company,
So
I think.
I first started in MGA in 2019 under a different name. We rebranded as Aspect in 2023. So we've been going for 5.5 years or so. We've grown to probably about 30 people in the MGA, but we've also done some vertical integration. We started our own insurtech company, a surveying company, even a recruitment company. So we've got into different value chains within the insurance sector to try to keep our costs down and our service high. So I'm constantly learning about different businesses and always fascinated to sort of see how far we can push things. I started my career in 2013 working for a large American insurance company. I was there for about 4.5 years. And then I went and worked for a different MGA called Recycle that a lot of people might insure with at the moment. So I learned a lot about the recycling sector through there, but I'd also worked on it a lot in my first job, albeit on the reinsurance side. So most people probably won't be aware of that, but insurers will insure themselves, which is called reinsurance. So when they do things that are particularly hazardous, they like to make sure that they can protect themselves from large losses. So the reinsurance industry is very heavily involved in supporting insurance companies in the waste sector. You just wouldn't necessarily know about it because it happens more in the background.
So it's just for my personal interest. So if I'm running, say, a waste facility and you're viewing that as quite high risk, you would provide insurance to the waste company, but you would then take out insurance against that risk with somebody else. Is that, and then that cost to you, if that extra insurance would be, I presume, charged to the waste company?
Yeah, so insurance companies are meant to be boring businesses. You invest in them, you maybe make a 5% return. No one wants any surprises. So they like to have very stable results. So what might happen is that, let's say an insurer takes on a £10 million insurance policy. They might have a contract in the background where if the whole thing burns down, they're going to pay the first 1 million, and then the reinsurers will pick up the next 9 million in claims. So if there's a broken window or a little bit of storm damage, the insurers just process that. That's fine. The reinsurers are there really for the catastrophic results. So there might be a year or two where reinsurers don't really have any losses and then something disastrous happens. So they're there to take away the volatility, and it's used a lot in
Mhm.
recycling to try to keep losses manageable for insurers. Um, so the pricing in the reinsurance sector can really affect what's going on in the insurance sector, because obviously that gets passed through eventually.
And is it right that quite commonly, from we're getting into the detail here, quite commonly you almost end up getting back to the same big players in terms of, I know for Albion Environmental, we're consultancy, so we carry PI insurance. And
Yeah.
anytime you get caught, you eventually look back and it always ends up being the same people that are actually insuring you in the first place. But it's
Yeah.
through various people that gets to that company, if you like. Is that fairly common as well?
Yeah, I mean, when I was working at the reinsurer, we worked with all the big names out there, and it's maybe an interesting area to start the conversation, because I started in 2013, and my impression at the time was that recycling insurance was beginning to become a problem,
Mm.
and maybe had been for a few years. So I'm not 100% sure exactly when the problem started, but I feel like a few years before that, maybe the premiums were relatively affordable. It wasn't really an issue. Every insurer did it. And then over the next 2 or 3 years, we sort of slowly saw lots of insurers pulling out of the sector, maybe tripling, quadrupling their pricing. I think it was probably quite poorly handled by the insurance sector, and wouldn't surprise me if insurance companies have quite a bad name in the waste and recycling sector, and some of that is probably deservedly so. I constantly hear stories about operators who were told, please spend, £1 or £2 million retrofitting a sprinkler system, only to be told at renewal, sorry, we can't insure you anymore. So
Mm.
people probably spent a lot of money on things that weren't necessarily required, or they then lost the insurance anyway. So I saw all of that unfold, and I was really drawn to the industry because we got involved in all sorts, but doing insurance for concrete sprinkled offices it's quite boring. Anyway, anyone can do it. It's pretty simple. So I was drawn to the challenges and problems around the waste sector, because that seemed to be an area where you can add a bit of value. What seemed to happen as everybody pulled out was that MGAs started pulling in.
Mhm.
Um, so insurers who are typically quite risk averse, like to stick to the guidelines, they were saying, you know, thank you very much. We don't want to do this anymore. That's it. Um, so then MGAs, which are small businesses, often, could be a team of 5 or 10 people who are probably more open to solving challenges and taking on higher risks. They started to fill the gap. They could say to insurance companies, we're specialists in this. There are certain things we insure, certain things we don't, or we do it in a different way. The pricing was typically a lot higher. So I started to see how all of that worked. Um, there were some practices within that I wasn't very comfortable with. So, for various reasons, I ended up starting my own MGA in 2019. We actually started in the reinsurance space. So we might have been involved, or we probably were involved in a lot of
Mhm.
insurance policies, but you wouldn't have heard our name because, like I
Yeah.
said, we would be in the background. But in 2023, we started to offer insurance. We did, very small, probably scrap metal merchants, stuff like that. But slowly, we've worked our way up. We've been quite successful with the results that we've had. Now we're quoting much larger accounts. We recently put out a quote on a site that had insurance values of up to 40 million. So, we're able to put stuff together now to cover literally any size, really. You're not going to find a Murph or anything much bigger than that,
Yeah.
unless you get into the waste energy sector. But for me, that's a sort of a separate topic.
That's another field. So what do you think was the difficult? What changed in So you were saying there was a big change sort of 13, 14 years ago. What do you think drove that change? Was it just the number of fires the sector was having from batteries or vapes, or was it a combination of things you think was sort of driving that, or just less appetite in the insurance industry for risk?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of changes. I mean, well, if you go back 30 years ago or 25 years ago or something, waste management was probably just landfill, really. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah.
you had the landfill tax come in, went up and up every single year, and that probably really drove the recycling industry in the UK. Obviously now we have there's tax on plastics recycling, so the extended producer responsibility, all these types of things. So I think the government has shaped an industry that's probably started growing very rapidly. Then the big one, obviously, is just lithium-ion batteries, really. Every time someone's putting a vape or, God forbid, a mobile phone into their bin, they're putting an incendiary device into the waste stream. So that's something that just started happening more and more and more. And I don't think that the insurance sector has made money insuring recycling. It'd be very difficult to find the statistics. If it has, it would be marginal. So the pricing is really a factor of supply and demand. Insurance pricing typically is quite competitive. When insurers make money, premiums keep going down because more capital floods the space. Whereas in recycling, capital keeps exiting the space because there's just fire after fire after fire. Typically, we're used to risks where the probability might be 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, maybe, so 0.1 or 0.01%. Whereas in recycling, you're talking 0.5 to 1%. So the risk could be 100 times higher than it is insuring other industries. Insurers, like I said, they don't really like that because volatility is not their game. Some reinsurers are okay with that. So to make it work, you have to kind of connect those two industries. But yeah, it's challenging. And that's just talking about the property side. So, that's only one of the policies people will be
Yeah.
paying for. On the employment liability space, there are challenges as well. Typically, I think the premiums are less challenging than on the property side, but it is a very hazardous trade. You can have RDF bales falling on people and you get fatalities, or if someone doesn't die and they're injured, it's actually a much more expensive claim because you might have to pay for their costs in perpetuity. Then you have a fleet policy. Lithium-ion batteries might just catch fire in the trucks.
Well, the classic one I always quote with this is wish estimate that there's 4 vehicles every day going on fire in the UK at the moment from
Yeah.
lithium-ion batteries, which is when you think some of these vehicles are 200 and 250 grand each. That alone must be a big risk.
Yeah, so like I said, I think the way the insurance sector handled all these problems probably wasn't very fair on the recycling industry, in my opinion. It could have been communicated better. But fundamentally, the problem is insurance companies have been losing a lot of money on it, so they don't want to do it. Had they been making money, this wouldn't have happened. So it's challenging. Like with all problems, there's probably a bit of fault in the insurance sector. There's probably a little bit more that the waste management sector can do as well. So it's good that maybe you and I come together and sort of share perspectives on these types of things. But yeah, I remember all the WISH guidelines when they were being written and formed. So for anybody who doesn't know what that is, essentially in 2015, 2016, I think the waste industry, insurers and the fire brigade came together. They started doing some scientific testing, essentially just setting fire to things and seeing what would happen and how things burn, why things burn. And there were a lot of findings from there. There's a 222-page document. Our policy wording is based on a lot of that stuff. So I've actually read that several times over. Now, a lot of people have to have their fire prevention plan in place, and a lot of that is based on WISH guidance. So Sometimes I've been in meetings where we have conditions on our policy. Maybe the broker starts sweating a little bit, but the operator, the recycling plant says, well, we have to do that for the Environment Agency anyway. So
Uh-huh.
I think aligning standards probably makes it a bit easier for the waste sector because they have to comply with EA standards as well as insurance conditions. So the
Yeah.
more you can make those the same, the easier I think it would be.
Mhm. I was going to ask that. So obviously, on the back of that work, the Environment Agency was quite active with their fire guidelines and making sure there was a fire prevention plan and all the facilities. Has that has that helped any, or is the vape's problem grown so big that it's not really had any impact? Or do you think there's been a bit of you know benefit from that type of work?
It's always hard to say. I mean, there've been some fires in the UK this year already. It's a volatile industry, so you might have 1 or 2 years where nothing happens, and then 2 or 3 losses that were 30 million each or something, and then there's not enough premium in the sector to cover it. So I'd like to think it's definitely improved things. Pricing's still very high, although it's probably a little bit cheaper than it was a year or two ago. But it's definitely created more awareness around what the problems are and how to solve them. The trouble is, like, to what extent people follow these things, I don't always know, because maybe some people just see it as a burden or a tick box exercise. So it's challenging because we might put a lot of this stuff into our wording and we try to do things differently, which, we can talk about later. But to what extent people really read these things, unless they've had a claim, at which point they probably do read the wording. I don't know. So
I think over the years running my own business, a number of times I've looked at insurance policies and thought, what does that actually mean? And I used to have a very good broker that I was able to go to and say, my insurance policy says this. What does this actually mean? And he's like, I don't actually know. I'll go back to them, and quite often it was they weren't quite sure why it was in or what it was there for, and so on. Once you start quizzing, but I think there's definitely more appetite in the sector for looking at the policies and trying to minimise the risks so they can get policy, because I think a lot of the companies do genuinely struggle. What about, one of the big things that I hear all the time from the waste sector is it's not them putting the vapes in the bin, it's not them putting the vapes in the batteries. So they're, if you like, getting society's problem and then getting either really expensive insurance or no insurance. Is there any work that you're doing, or the insurance industry is doing, to sort of push back at government and say, look, these things are quite dangerous, so should we not be having a bit more control over their disposal?
yeah, I mean, I actually have some sort of quite strong opinions on things like this. So I started a business with my own money. I worked 2 jobs in 2019 to make it work. So I'm quite sort of tough on a lot of stuff. Like, I have a bit of philosophy that a lot of things aren't our fault, but they're still our problem. Relying on the government, it's not really something that I like to do. I don't think the government has made anything easier for businesses in the UK in the last 5 years. You could please tell me if I'm wrong, but just things like NI going up, always new regulation. So I think if you're expecting the government to help you or you're blaming the government, I think you're kind of in the wrong starting point. There's a lot of things, I think, when you're running your business, like I said, it's not your fault, but it's still your problem. And as much as you blame people throwing things in the bin or the government not doing anything, it still doesn't help you. So you can only really control what's in your own hands, which is a bit of brutal, but often that's the reality. I think there are more things that can be done. So, there can be more collaboration between recycling plants and insurers, and you can put pressure on the government. The extended producer responsibility, I think, is probably a win for the recycling industry. So that's probably an example where where you do take that into your own hands and you put the pressure on, you can change things. But otherwise, the government, they're too busy with everything else. They probably just don't care. Yeah, I think, yeah, for example, a lot of the times when insurance is done, it's quite a big rush. It's typically my policy is expiring in 4 or 5 weeks, or sometimes we get sent stuff and it incepts tomorrow. So it's very difficult to get to know the operators, and then you're just playing a game based on statistics, really. So you say, well, this is the
Hmm.
price that works on average, so this is what we're going to put out. This is the policy that works on average, so this is what we're going to put out. We actually started our own risk management team, so a separate company that does surveying. Where we've had some success is where we've had waste companies come to us earlier.
Hmm.
We actually go out on the site for free,
Yeah.
which is, that doesn't typically happen. So we'll go out there, we'll meet them, and we'll walk them through their current policy, what our policy is, the differences. We'll look at what they're doing, and then we can sort of tailor stuff maybe on the pricing or in the policy to meet their business requirements. But if something lands on our desk 3 days before inception, it's impossible
It's
to
not going to
walk.
happen.
So maybe I'd encourage people to reach out maybe 3 months before, because every business is different. But in the insurance sector, we're just working on statistics. So unless we know the plant, or we've been there ourselves, then we just have to assume it's an average plant.
But the one that's going back to that feedback to government, the one that surprises me is if you think about the number of waste fires have been at waste facilities, and if you think about the number of refuse vehicles burnt down, if you did a rough tally of these between the insurance companies, it's going to run to billions of pounds.
Mm.
And well, you could view that as a loss to the British economy, or you could view that as yeah, we're going to more work for rebuilding these. But it's a big chunk out of the sector that, I think if that information was presented to the government and say, look, this vapes issues, which you could probably chart it if you went back 10 years to when vape started to now, you could probably show that growth and say that that's what's costing UK economy. And we need to get a bit more serious about that. And I
Yeah.
think it's probably yourselves as the insurance sector that have got that data to hand, rather than the waste industry can be quite fragmented sometimes, because you've got local authorities, you've got SMEs, and then you've got the multinationals. It's often quite hard to piece together all that big picture.
Yeah, that's maybe another issue, is that there's no sort of central database of premiums and losses that go through the UK recycling industry.
Mm.
There might be some large brokers who do 20-30% of it maybe, and then they've got an idea of what's going on, but no one
Mm.
really has the full picture. Because we play in both the insurance and the reinsurance space, we've got a relatively good idea. We might see a lot of data for much larger companies. Some of them can be international players even, so you can look at data that's not just based on the UK but could be on global recycling. Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, call me cynical, I just think like going
Uh,
down the government route is it's
It's not
slow.
going to happen. It's not going to happen, is
Yeah,
it?
I think there's probably quicker wins, maybe through better technology, kind of public awareness. um and there's the single-use vape ban as well. So the government might say, well, we've done that, but then,
Yeah.
to what extent is that being, flouted, or is it being implemented properly? I don't think single-use vapes have entirely disappeared from the waste
No.
stream. So
No.
even if the
They've just
government does something, like, it still, doesn't necessarily help. But AI might be something that might help the industry a bit more. So there's AI now that can detect off gases, that will predict that a
Mhm.
lithium-ion battery might be about to explode. It can search for them instead of them being manually picked out. You can have AI that's scanning a lot faster, or it can detect heat quicker.
Yeah.
So I always think that technology is a better
Mhm.
solution to a lot of problems. So if we try to go down that route and then hope that the public becomes more aware, hope that the government does something, but I think relying on the public to stop putting vapes in the waste stream, or the government to do something effectively, is not something I'd bet my mortgage on.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So going back to the classic sort of waste management company, a recycling facility, an MRF, what are their issues if they're either uninsured or underinsured? What's their sort of risks and challenges, and what can they do about that if they've got an issue?
So I'd say read the policy wording. I would say today there's no excuse for not doing it. A few years ago, I completely get it. It's not the most interesting thing to read. It's probably 50, 60 pages. You probably don't understand it. But now you can go on ChatGPT for free, Gemini, whatever you prefer to use. You can drag and drop the document in there. Within 30 seconds, it will analyze it for you, and you'll learn what you're paying for, because these insurance policies, I don't know, maybe they're 50, 60 grand on average, but some people are paying hundreds of thousands or in the millions, right?
Yeah,
So if you're spending that much money on insurance, at
you
least
want to know what you're getting.
check it. It's so much money. So check what you're buying, and um,
And how
one of the
much, sorry, I was going to say, how much challenges are there? If you go through your policy and there's some in there, there's no way we can comply with that because it's too tight a criteria. Can you come back to you and say, look, this is what we're doing in that space, but we can't meet that standard? Is that practical? Obviously, there might be a change in premium, but that's
Exactly. I mean, what you don't want to do is have a huge fire, then check your policy, and the insurer says, well, we're not paying for that because you didn't comply with it.
mhm,
This is where I, became a bit frustrated with the MGA space, where we tried to do stuff differently. So a lot of the large insurers pulled out, a lot of MGAs came into the space, and they'll put stuff in there like excluding fires from lithium-ion batteries, right? Now, if you look at the statistics, something like 38% of fires come from hot materials, and
mhm,
most of that will be lithium-ion batteries. So, what happens in practice then? Well, that insurance claim is going to go to court, and then it might just depend on which judge you get, what mood they're in that day. They might come up with a compromise. So if you've had a £10 million insurance claim, they say, well, the insurer's going to pay 5 because you weren't complying with the conditions, but they didn't really explain it properly. In which case, that could be the end of your business. Practices like that, I never felt comfortable with, especially owning my own business. I'd rather that we're a bit more expensive, that we're a premium product, but if you know, if the place burns down, then we're there to pay. The problem that we have as a business is that if people don't read the wording, it's very hard to position yourself as a premium product. So typically, I would guess most people say, well, what's the price? Oh, I'm just going to pay for the lowest one. But if something was 5, 10% more, but it actually covers you in the event that there is a fire and stops you from having to go to court, I mean, just the delay in the payout could kill your business, right? You might
mhm.
get the payout, but if you have to wait 12, 18 months for it, you've got a liquidity crunch. Um, so, I'm very vocal in telling people read the wording, because we think we've got a better product. Um, and the more business we can pick up, the more diversified we are, the more economies of scale we have. We're competing against people who they come in cheaper, but then they exclude everything. So, they can be cheaper because they're not going to pay as many claims anyway. So we're trying to do things the right way, but then we also need people in the recycling industry to value that product, and to work with us. So, again, if we can come to your site 3 months earlier, let's go through the wording. We might say this needs to be stored 10 meters away. You say, all I've got is 6 meters, but I've got a concrete wall between the storage and the building. And we say, yep, that's fine. We'll amend the policy wording, because then everyone knows what the score is. If anything happens, the judge will see that, everyone understood the risk, everyone understood the policy, and the policy is designed for your business. So in an industry where there is a high chance of loss, it's really worth looking at these things.
Do you know that there's two things springing to mind there? Actually, one was we're maybe a different scenario because we're a small office-based company, but we generally just go back to the existing insurance company. With waste operators, does that happen a lot, or are they are they forced to price around because they're struggling to get a competitive price?
I mean, this will apply to any type of insurance you buy. I
Yeah,
think if you shop around a little bit, you'll probably get a better deal.
yeah,
There are a lot of waste sites out there that we can't be cheaper on because we haven't been shown it.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, if you own a site and you're buying the insurance, make sure you ask, where's my Aspect quote, right? But also ask, you know, where's my quote from this MGA or this insurer? I don't mind competition, but make sure you have the full picture. If you're only getting a quote from one insurer, you know, maybe the
Mm,
price seems a bit high. You know, try and get 5 quotes and compare them.
yeah.
Um, some will work harder than others to get these things done.
Mhm,
But even there, you need to be sort of mindful of what you're doing because there could be a new entrant that comes in, you know, 30% cheaper. But again, why are they 30% cheaper? Read the wording. What is the
mhm,
product? Is this a sustainable relationship? Because a lot of the time in business, you just need stability in your costs. And probably what frustrates people in the waste sector is maybe they had a cheap deal with someone, but then they weren't charging enough or something, and then they had to pull out the sector, and then the premium doubles,
mm,
and you know, and then 3 years later it comes down again, and then they pull out. So you don't have that stability in the pricing. So it can be worth just sort of choosing one, developing a long-term relationship, but at least be aware of your options of what's out there. And it's, you know, it's one of my frustrations that there probably are companies out there that we could give better
mhm.
terms and prices to, but we need to make sure that they're aware of who we are. So, you know, coming on a podcast like this is
Yeah,
great. So, you know, thank
yeah.
you again for that because
No, that's okay.
you know,
That's okay.
hopefully everyone's asking where's my Aspect quote?
No,
Can they do it any cheaper?
absolutely. I was thinking that how do you think the AI, chat GPT type of things gonna, you were making an example there, comparing one policy to another is probably, 50, 60 page documents, quite dense documents, quite sometimes legally orientated documents that, some people are probably not used to looking through. You're probably well versed in looking at them, but, somebody in the waste sector's maybe not. And as you say, you could quite easily put two competing quotes into ChatGPT and ask it to analyze and give you the difference. Are you starting to see that feeding through where customers are doing that and recognizing that, or is that still not,
No.
it's not happening yet?
Maybe once or twice where like I suspect someone used AI because they're going into a lot of detail. I don't think most people do that. And it's so easy. I mean, you know, 3, 4 years ago, 100% understand reading one of these policy wordings, understanding it. You know, you maybe even your brokers didn't fully understand them sometimes. You
Yeah.
might need a lawyer to understand it. So I fully understand why people wouldn't want to do that. But today, you know, it's very quick and easy, it's free. They give you very concise summaries. They can tell you what to look out for, explain any terms you don't like or you don't understand. So, you know, if you're spending 100 grand a year on insurance, take, you know, even if it's just 5, 10 minutes
It's well
to
well worth doing, isn't it?
run through the product.
And what about in terms of your side? Are insurance companies starting to use it? You mentioned AI for sort of fire detection and so on. Are you doing anything your side in terms of use of AI to improve your policies and improve your underwriting?
Yeah. I mean, it's another subject I've probably talk up for hours on, but we started our own tech company because we wanted to be in control of that type of stuff. That's, you know, some of that makes us a bit cheaper on the back end, sort of keeps our costs down a little bit, that we can handle volume better, we can produce policies quicker. So we're trying to integrate AI as quickly as we can. It's a very rapidly moving space. Every 2 to 3 weeks, there's something new that comes out. AI is almost an old topic now. Like the new thing is agentic AI and what that can do
Hmm.
for you. So there's a lot of things that we're utilizing there that, you know, it's more for like processing a lot of the time. In terms of physically managing risk, that stuff is, I haven't really tested that stuff. I'd love to find waste management companies that, you know, would want to work with us on that. So, you know, if there's anybody out there who wants to reach out, we'd love to try some of this stuff out because, like I said, if it works as a solution, I think it's a better way of doing things than relying on the government or the man on the streets
Hmm.
or woman on the street. Sorry. So yeah, if there's anyone there who who wants to play around with some of this new technology, we could try to subsidize some of the costs from the premium maybe, and then if it works, we can then apply that to other people out there. If AI can spot a lithium-ion battery before it goes off and someone can remove it, well, 38% of fires could be removed from the
Mm.
industry.
We're looking at a system internally here. So quite often the challenge for waste management companies is there quite a lot of competing priorities. That they'll have their environmental permit, they'll have all their health and safety rules, they'll have their own internal policies, and sometimes that gets a bit lost, and the documentation becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And quite often it's similar risks you're trying to control. So the insurance stuff will be in there and all the rest. And we're trialing the system at the moment using Claude, and it basically pulls out the key things, and it highlights what's been done, what needs actioned, what needs addressed, and simplifies it right down. And it seems to, we've not tested it fully yet, but it seems to, we've put some data into it, and it's done the job. Where we're next going with that is sort of sense checking it to make sure it's actually, what it's producing is correct, if you like, compared with the actual documentation. But I think the whole AI space, I agree totally, is going to transform things. And I would think that, the discussion we had there about, comparing policy to policy, that's not just going to happen in the waste world. That's going to happen with your own car insurance, your own personal insurance, your house insurance, all that type of stuff that I think potentially it'll come to a bit of a shock to some of the insurance companies, because of that issue you were talking about, them excluding everything will probably get really highlighted.
Yeah, and there's areas in insurance like if you're buying your home insurance is not really a problem in the insurance sector. You've probably got a perfectly good policy. But in recycling, there are a lot of problems in the insurance space. So that's definitely an area where it's worth looking at this stuff and using AI to help you. Ultimately, what we're talking about is trying to bring down costs for
Mhm.
waste management companies. That maybe they can save a bit of money there, but every industry is going to be looking to maybe reduce staff a little bit by using AI. Rachel Reeves isn't sort of helping young people at the moment because you're AI plus NI pushing people out of the workforce, but there's so much pressure on businesses in the UK at the moment that you have to find every productivity gain that you can get. And I run a business as well. I fully understand there's so many things going on in your head. There's different regulators, there's, your customers, your clients, the people management. There's so much going on. There's different types of risks. But one thing we like to think about as a company is what I call existential risk. So there's a lot of data on success in business just being about, surviving, just staying in the game for as long as possible. If you want to have an investing parallel, the reason why Warren Buffett is supposedly one of the best investors of all time is because he did it from the age of like 13 years old. Um, and by the time he was 60, he was worth something like 10 billion. And most people with 10 billion at 60 years old would be playing golf. But he kept going. And then, now he's worth 100 billion or whatever. So the secret was almost his longevity. That he did it from the age of 13 to 90 or something. So if you can just stay in business for a long time, then typically you'll make it through like the good times and the bad times. But what you need to avoid are existential risks to your business, which in the waste management sector could be my whole plant burned down and it's the
Mhm.
only one I've got. Um, even if you are insured, it might be a bit of a delay in getting the payments, or, if you have multiple fatalities at your site and, HSE just shuts you down, these are existential risks to your business. So, we think about that a lot in insurance because, we're risking real money at the end of the day. And if it goes wrong, we'll get shut down. So, um, you have to identify what is a threat to, that you just can't take. I have a phrase on the wall in our office. It's called Russian roulette statistically works syndrome. So it's an attachment to odds, favorable odds, where the downside is unacceptable no matter what. So, there are certain situations where, something might seem very attractive, cutting costs on safety or cutting costs on insurance. And maybe the odds are in your favor. 99% of the time, you probably get away with it. But that 1% is so catastrophic, it's just never worth taking. And Russian roulette, the odds are in your favor, 5 to 6 or something like that. But the 1 to 6 just isn't worth the risk.
It's not worth it. But the call I had before this call was with a waste management company whose plant burnt to the ground in 2021, and that's them just now rebuilt the plant and just process commissioned the plant. So that's taken them 5 years. And that company's only survived because it's a big multinational with a healthy balance sheet. So if that was an SME, I don't think it would be rebuilt, or even with an insurance payout, it's probably not going to be paid out. So taking the crystal ball to look to the future for waste management, what's the big risks on the horizon? Is it still going to be what we've talked about, fire, health and safety, or do you see any emerging risks?
I mean, I'm an optimist. I'd like to think it can't get much worse for the recycling industry in terms of...
It's going to get worse. We use more and more. There's more and more disposable tech being used. There's more and more mobile scooters and bikes and all
I mean,
sorts.
one thing I'd maybe look to avoid, so something that we see more on the continent, to be honest, but occasionally in the UK, is solar panels being put on roofs. So that's something that insurers aren't particularly keen on. So there might be a lot of recycling plants out there that, want to do it for environmental reasons or to save money on their electricity bill or something like that. That's not going to help you from an insurance perspective. That, you'll have a live current going through your roof. If you have composite panels, so you might have between your metal sheet roof, you have combustible insulation, a bit like they had in Grenfell or something like that. It can just set fire to it through the heat. Or if you have a fire and the fire brigade show up, they probably won't put water on it because they could electrocute themselves. So we don't see it too much in the UK, more on the continent. But we try to sort of spread our bets as much as possible. It's another thing we do a little bit differently. So we're doing insurance for recycling plants in Australia, Ireland, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany. So we see, some slightly different practices.
Do they have a similar fire issue?
Everyone has an issue with it. And
everybody's got vapes.
Everybody's got vapes. I mean, they can be slightly different. We commingle all our waste here in the UK, whereas, in Germany or Sweden, they might separate it.
Yep.
So, the plants can maybe be run a little bit better out there, but everyone has issues with the vapes, spontaneous combustion. It could be a plant in Spain. Imagine if there's a lithium-ion battery and it's sitting under the hot sun. So, the challenges are throughout the industry in Europe. It's not just the UK. But I like to think there's a lot of opportunities with AI for the sector. So, I'd rather sort of focus on those things. I think some of the things the government's done is probably starting to help the industry a bit. Like, I spoke about the extended producer responsibility and the plastics tax that got introduced in 2022 to rebalance things. So the Iran war and like the commodity super cycle at the moment can be a double-edged sword. Insurers like to insure businesses that are doing well. Metal recyclers might be benefiting from high copper prices. But at the same time, the theft risk has probably gone up quite a lot.
We can never win. We can never win, whatever happens.
No,
Uh,
no. Or, if there's, maybe plastics recyclers are trying to process a lot at the moment with the
uh,
oil prices being high, that can be a risk. But when they're low, there could be a lot of stock out there. So I think it's just, that there's always stuff to adapt to. And it's on the insurance industry and the recycling industry to find answers to these solutions. Again, like I said, if the government or the man on the street can help, great, but it's not something that I
the
would rely on.
reality's not there, is it? I was just thinking back to when I first started out in waste management. It's exactly what you're saying. It was, the 1990s. Everything just went to landfill. It
Yeah,
was in a way it was relatively straightforward. Now we're bringing waste in, we're storing a bit, we're then doing really complex processes with it, that we're then storing the product, so you multiplied the problem by 3 already, because you've got the storage, you've got the treatment,
yeah.
and and before you add in, things like vapes and so on. So for the waste operators listening, is there a sort of practical step you could maybe advise them to try and help their insurance premiums, try and get them reduced? Apart from, I think you've probably covered a few of the things, but any top tips they can take home?
Yeah, like I said, read the wording, go through that, make sure you get at least, the value for the money that you're spending and tailor it to your plant. Shop around as much as you can. I do think prices have come down a little bit in the last year or two, but it's always quite volatile. But, ask where's my Aspect quote, because I know, we don't always get to quote on everything. And, if you can meet your insurers, try and send your submission in maybe 3 months in advance. Have people come out on site, understand your business. You're not just a name on an email. Then, like I said, if we get something 3 days before inception, we're just working off the statistics. So the
Yeah.
more we can get to know people and understand their business, the less uncertainty there is that we have to price for. That can definitely help. Um, Insurers or sort of waste management companies who take higher deductibles or excesses, that's usually quite positively received by the industry, because,
Mhm.
if you're putting your own
Yeah.
money where your mouth is, show that you believe in your business. Try to store stuff away from expensive machinery, keep it outside. If it's probably very difficult for operators in London because there's just not a lot of space. But
Mhm.
if the RDF catches fire, if it's right next to a £5 million piece of equipment, or 2 meters, even 2 meters away from the building, it's probably going to melt the building. But if it's 30 meters away from the building, it's probably not the end of the world for anybody. Maybe everyone should just move their plants to Scotland, where you've got a lot more space.
Get a wee bit of rainfall to put the fires out as well.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think in defence of the waste management companies, there's always the best intention. We're going to run this plant with the minimum of stock on site and all the rest, and in best intentions, vehicle breakdown, supply chain will disrupt, they'll end up with material on site, and there's always a challenge in there for them. But I think some of the things you were saying about the risk, and the catastrophic risk potentially about some of these things going on, that
Yeah,
maybe I I think there's probably a lot more awareness in the sector now than there was probably 5 or 6
yeah.
years ago. But even then, I think some sites are still fairly complacent about the actual risk.
If there's anyone who'd be willing to work a bit more closely with us, I'd be really receptive to
Yeah.
people reaching out. So we're relatively new business, but we're trying to do things differently. We're
Uh-huh.
up and coming, but the more support we can get from the industry, especially trying to do things properly, and the more stability we can give. We can't do everything we want to do at the moment, but we are working on one. Just very obvious way to save cost is bundling products together, because the higher the premium, the more insurers are going to be interested in it. That's just regular economies of scale that you'll see in any
Yeah.
industry.
Uh-huh.
We're trying to get into that in over the next year or two. So if there are people out there who, can help us get on that journey, and people that we can work with in the long term to give stability in pricing and work on projects like seeing if, new AI technology can reduce claims, We'd love to work with people out there to try and solve this problem together and do it the right way.
Oh, that sounds good. That sounds good. And just second last question for you. Any misconceptions you think the big bad world of waste has got about insurance? Or do you think we've got lots? Probably not reading the small print is probably the biggest issue, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if it was a positive view on the industry. So, I fully understand that. I think the insurance industry hasn't treated the waste industry very well. A lot of things were poorly communicated. So, like I said, we're out there. We're relatively new. We're growing. We're trying to make a difference. So, hopefully that's the misconception that there is someone trying to do things the right way, and if we can work together with people, then I think these things can be solved. I don't think it's impossible.
Last question for you. Any advice for a younger person coming into either your sector and into the waste sector? Any hot tips you can get? You've obviously, you're not in the waste industry as such, you're in the insurance industry, but you've seen the attraction of the waste industry as a sector, if you like.
Yeah, and say yes to everything. Try and get out there. Try and meet people. Going back to AI, I think that will remove a lot of work. But the one thing it won't do is relationships between people. I think that will become more important over time. So, if you're in the waste management sector, meet the local authorities, meet the insurers, meet the fire department, try to understand the whole picture, because then you can start piecing things together. We always try to encourage our underwriters to go on site, actually see it with your own eyes, understand it. But yeah, I think getting out there, meeting people is undervalued.
I know, totally. It just springs to mind, you mentioned meet the fire authority. I had a client recently that decided to go out and check the fire hydrant in the street, and literally it was like a trickle coming at the fire hydrant. And
Yeah,
their question was then, how do we get this resolved? How do we get that? And I was in Scotland. It was like they contacted Scottish Water, and the next day there was proper pressure on the fire hydrant. So it's things like that you don't. Like,
yeah,
I know I've been involved in waste fires at sites where the biggest problem the fire service had was getting water to the site. They
yeah,
just couldn't get sufficient water to put the fire out, and we ended up helping them get water to where the fire was. So it's thinking through things like that. So that was a bit of a deep dive for me into a whole industry I don't know anything about, Henrik. So thank you
yeah.
for ever so much, and thank you for being
No problem.
patient with my sort of line of questioning, if you like. So I'd just like to say, on behalf of listeners, thank you very much.
I hope that was useful for you and your listeners, and really appreciate you making the time for me.
Thank you very much. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you again next Thursday at 4 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share with friends, and send us your feedback at hello@rubbishtalk.co.uk.